Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and kick off. Thank you for attending. You are currently in the chat room and the panel for capturing the connected consumer. I'm going to take just a second and let our panel of participants introduce themselves. Ryan, would you like to start, please?
Sure, Kathy. Thanks very much. Thanks everybody for attending today. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Pyramid for North America operations. We're a self-service kiosk manufacturer, been in business for over 25 years, and got a real heavy focus on a variety of different verticals such as banking, retail, QSR, healthcare, and transportation. Really excited to be here and participate.
Thank you. Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Rademacher. I'm president of John Ryan. Our focus is almost exclusively on retail financial services and reinventing the customer experience in the retail locations.
Thank you, Nancy. And lastly, Richard.
I'm Richard Newman, the Chief Technology Officer for Reliant. We focus on edge computing, which is used to drive digital innovation in the physical branch, store, or restaurant.
So we're here to talk to you. Thank you, Richard, by the way. We're here today to talk a little bit about capturing that connected consumer. So with the limited amount of time we have, we're just going to start off. I'm going to launch the first question. I'm going to have Richard take this question. What is the #1 most impactful change banks or enterprises can activate or embrace today to attract new consumers?
So I would tell you it's personalization. It's the ability to cater the product or service that you have on an individual basis. It's one of the real game changers that we see with respect to overall digital transformation. And in banking particularly, it's fascinating because banks typically don't necessarily have a lot of differentiation in the products that they offer from one customer to another, in part because it's a heavily regulated environment, in part because of risk and other things like that. But digital technology can really change that. And there's no reason why you can't have a lot of personalization in the individual banking solutions you offer people. And this extends both from the online experience down to the in-branch experience. Because consumers in today's world want to see a lot of choice. I mean, and they really can. You know, it used to be that, you know, what brought someone to a bank was the fact that it was the closest bank to them. But nowadays you can bank online with banks all over the world. You know, there's far more choices out there. And the way to bring people in is to give them experiences that they feel very close to them, very, very owned by them. And that's done through a lot of different ways. It could be in the way the marketing is delivered to the way the products are tailored.
I completely agree with you. And I think that could segue nicely into a response here from Nancy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a lot of the points that I've been thinking about lately. And one, I think, really interesting fact about what's been happening in the past few months is that banks with physical branches are really showing up to consumers in the same way as pure play internet banks are showing up for consumers, because the battleground right now is in the virtual world, as long as customers are being deprived a little bit of an intensive physical experience. So this is calling into question, you know, what is the role of the physical experience going to be after it's more, you know, accessible to consumers? And I think that banks are realizing that it does afford a really important moment for differentiation. It's a level of differentiation that just can't be achieved in a virtual, you know, one-on-one battle with a competitor. And so what will that differentiation be? And I think what you hit on it, the personalization that is now possible by being able to analyze who's in branch, why they're in branch, and serve up exactly the experience those customers need is going to be a key way, I think, that the physical experience becomes the competitive advantage it needs to be for the amount of investment that's made in it. So I think we're going to see big changes in the way people look at the virtual experience and how they empower the level of personalization that Richard was just speaking of.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nancy. Ryan, what's your viewpoint?
I tend to agree with Nancy and Richard, especially Richard's comment about people want more options. Extremely important. And I look at I'm just going to call it the pre-COVID world and the post-COVID world. I don't think a lot a lot has changed in terms of the options that consumers want. From our perspective, being in the kiosk self-service space, customers want to be able to go in, either interact on a mobile phone, interact on a self-service kiosk, or have that option, obviously, to interact in person as well. Then also the ability to grab as much information, content, and have a lot of options in a meaningful way. If you look at the old branch of the future, before that digital transformation started, really, you're waiting in line, right? And hoping that the person in front of you is going to be able to take care of you in a meaningful way. So I think people really need to get into that embracement of having multiple lanes of options in a banking context. Now, if we look at that in the pre-COVID world, I think that's been really top of mind for everybody, and call it the post-COVID, the new norm. I think one of the differentiators that's there is embracing newer technologies that were a little bit slower to market. That's contactless payment. That's introducing technologies like facial recognition. In addition, introducing technologies such as voice AI in a meaningful self-service way. And how do we tie all those systems together?
Wonderful. And speaking of tying all the systems together, that brings to the forefront new technologies and the introduction of new technologies into an enterprise or a branch scenario. For the panel, what are you seeing as the most in-demand technology that your customers, your end user customers, are wanting for their consumers? Nancy, would you like to start out?
Sure, why not? I mean, obviously I'm operating in the retail marketing realm, and so the technologies that I interact with are concerned with that. Some of the things that we're hearing a lot of is, obviously touchless access to services in the branch. Also, check-in from outside the branch and inside the branch using touchless techniques. For people who are, wanting to be summoned into the branch from their cars, they don't necessarily, they want a very seamless journey in that regard. And then I think another technology that's maybe more nascent that people are just beginning to think about is how to bring the sort of sophistication of online journey mapping and journey analytics into the physical world and create a more unified understanding of the customer journey. So I think technologies like that, as banks again try and perfect the role of the physical location in the distribution system, are going to be increasingly important.
Wonderful. Ryan?
I think spot on to what Nancy's saying. Now, from our perspective, there's a variety of different new technologies, all centering around engagement and how can I engage. I don't think it's enough just to give someone, when we talk about those different options in those different lanes, I don't think it's enough just to say, hey, go use the kiosk or go use your mobile phone and limit it at that. From our perspective, in the kiosk space, especially in retail and banking, not only do people want technology options, relative from an AI perspective, but they also want cleaning options. They also want the ability to integrate a contactless solution with a mobile device, if they'd like to do so. And I think, not to take away from the technology aspect, but Nancy had mentioned contactless. And I think this contactless world is just going to be the new norm moving forward. So believe it or not, it's not just about technology. It's certainly the foundation, but also implementing, when you're talking about touching things, period, it's almost impossible to get there, but there's a lot of solutions out there. And I don't think there's a one size fits all.
I would agree.
From our standpoint, it's, rigorous cleaning. Obviously, we're in a touchscreen capacity, but also integrating technology into our kiosk that it limits you to be able to engage in it in a touch manner or not in a touch manner, and leverage your mobile phone and use the screen more potentially from a digital signage perspective, or leverage different peripherals. We've also seen new technologies such as UV cleaning, that is being put on digital signage and kiosks. In addition to, there's many companies out there right now that are doing these, it sounds so simple and low tech, but disposable styluses bank as well. So someone can go up, use an ATM, use a contactless solution and grab that device and then engage with the kiosk, whether it be on their mobile phone or on their device. So I think
and then that's a throwaway item too at that point, right?
Throwaway recyclable item. It's been a pretty high demand because people still in some shape or form need to engage with with devices in a meaningful way, but still want that contactless at the same time. So it's tricky, but there's solutions out there to make it happen.
Fabulous. And Richard, let's hear your viewpoint.
So what I would probably touch on is a general need to try to find a way to make the banking experience as frictionless as possible, as seamless, to cut out unnecessary steps and, you know, and give customers a much quicker turnaround. So good examples are, you know, if you're engaging with customers, whether online or whether you know, or whether in branch, and you're involved in card issuance, you want to get the card issuance process to happen immediately. It should not be the type of thing where they're filling out an application and, you know, and 3 to 10 days later they get the card in the mail. It should be, I'm going to get a new credit card. I'm going to walk into the bank and I'm going to walk out with it. And the entire process is going to take 15 minutes or maybe 5 minutes or maybe 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's ways to do this, and they're here right now. And a lot of it's about thinking differently. So some of the innovation that we see in traditional retail, like the cashierless checkout, where you don't have to interact with the cashier or wait in line or get your goods totaled up, that type of experience is going to become the norm across a lot of different types of industries. So you're going to look to provide much more richer, much more meaningful self-service experience that has a real reduction in friction, again, whether online or offline. And a big part of it, what's going to drive this, of course, is underlying, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies, which are able to you know, effectively proxy, you know, what might be human behavior on the part of bank management or bank associates walking a customer through the process. They're going to understand who they are. And the thing that really can make this different than what happens in sort of retail or hospitality is customers self-identify in banking. There's no need for an anonymous experience. You know, that's not how this works. So the sooner you can identify a customer walking into your branch through whatever means are available, and there are a lot, and the quicker you can personalize the experience of them, and the quicker you can set up their transaction, whatever they want to do, and make it happen as fast as possible with as few steps as possible, the better.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. And in line with those commentary, or with your commentary in regards to experiences, what are some of the key ingredients that the panel sees that will have to be in place within the infrastructure to take advantage of performance, security, and a good customer journey / great customer experience? Richard?
So it's consistency from physical to digital and vice versa. You know, right now, when you interact in certain banking elements, you have a very different experience online and with the app than you do in the store. It's sort of two different worlds. Those need to be brought together. And foundationally, technologies that work in the cloud or work online can be made to work in the branch as well. And what we find at a very basic level is that in-bank systems are typically several generations older than what's happening in the cloud. And then the second thing is some of this comes down to the way banks tend to operate their digital experience. They're often heavily reliant on vendors and the like, and there needs to be more customization, more tailorization by individual banks to create their own experience that best suits the customers that they want to have.
Wonderful. Ryan, would you like to weigh in?
I think it's hard to go after Richard stole a lot of the thunder and kind of just teed it up so well. Spot on consistency. You know, feedback that we get from consumers as well as end users is, you know, I speak to one person in the branch, I have a different kiosk experience, I have a different ATM experience, you know, I'm leveraging my mobile application, and just nothing is kind of talking to each other in a meaningful way. And it seems like my online experience and my in-store experience, it's almost like two different companies. Yeah. But I think consistency is extremely, extremely important if you want to capture and grab those consumers, especially the ones that, you know, potentially are online consumers and customers, and you want to bring them into that store and get that experience and get that touch and be able to have maybe a more meaningful engagement. The quickest way to have someone go to the other branch is they walk in and they're like, oh my God, the app, the service, the experience is nothing like if the consumer is telling you it's easier to do it online, then that's a connectivity.
It's a massive disconnect.
Exactly. And I think one other thing that's really important from our perspective in that self-service space is testing the waters and putting your toe in and getting some sample use cases in a variety of different locations, piloting those use cases so you can bring that data back and do either a course correction or an augmentation in the experience versus doing this massive rollout and potentially not getting the, the greatest feedback. Super important.
And that's where I think some of these really advanced journey analytics that are so familiar to people in the online world will start having a role in the physical world, and trying to understand where those journeys are impeded in the physical world and removing the friction that they have in that arena, as we do so well in the online tools. I think it's going to be fascinating.
I do too. Ryan, I'm going to start with you on this next question, so you don't have to follow Richard. What are the most impactful changes for both the consumer and financial industry in a post-COVID world? And this doesn't have to just be financial. It could be the enterprise as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, so many different ways to kind of answer that question. I think the new norm, I don't have to cover that. We all understand what expectations are from businesses and society. But also, how do you communicate that message in a meaningful way to the customer? So when they're coming into your place of business, whatever place of business that is, that they feel safe, secure, protected, and encouraged to embrace, that new technology that's in there. I think security and privacy, as soon as you talk about going in somewhere, is, let's just talk about your normal health things from a post-COVID perspective. And then when you're starting to engage with physical technology again in a very meaningful way, to Richard's point, that's being able to get a card that's digital versus physical. Well, there's some security and some aspects and some teaching your consumers how to do that. A piece of technology, which is definitely for another panel, is a lot of businesses are doing temperature checks. Whether it be temperature checks of consumers that are coming in, it's a quick scan. We've got a kiosk solution that does that as well, for employees as well as consumers. So it's adding a good amount of protection, privacy, and security, so a consumer has almost no worry about coming into your business and interacting either with an individual who's been tested when they came into work in a meaningful way. And if they're going to transform that physical into digital, that they know their information, any kind of banking information as well is secured, private, in a meaningful way. So a lot of ways to answer that question, but I know we're a little pressed for time.
Well, but I do want to ask a question before I go on to the other panelists on that, Ryan. I know specific with your solution, you've got the temperature check on your kiosk. Can you talk a little bit about how as we're looking ahead in our crystal ball for a true post-COVID world, how is that being implemented and utilized? Is it as soon as you walk in the bank? Is there kind of a process that the consumer goes through in order to get their temperature checked? How does that work?
Great question. So we've got two really solid use cases as it pertains to kind of the banking and the financial space. One is, let's break it down to staff as quick, that first bullet point. Consumers want to go in a place of business and know that the people that are working, for them are safe and protected. Mm-hmm. So, our solution from a staff perspective is it's a very, very simple process. That person comes in, they can scan in either with a driver's license, they can scan in with their employee badge, go up to the kiosk. If the business likes, they'll ask a variety of different questions. Have you been exposed? Have you been out of the country, etc. Scan their ID badge. Now they're checked into their employment and they get a quick temperature check. Privacy and security is really the background of that, of that user experience, that UI, UX, and software application, to make sure all that information is confidential. So what do you do in that? So that's kind of half the solution, right? Now, all of your staff are coming in. They're not going to infect others. You're not going to have any risk to your actual staff. But a consumer coming in that business, to me, I also see it as a marketing opportunity of saying, hey, listen, every staff that comes into our building, in our office, is checked in a meaningful way. Their information is secure and private, and you know that they don't have a temperature. I don't think that's the solution, but I think it's the first line of defense, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Now, from a consumer perspective, it can be more complicated or less complicated in terms of how they engage with that device. It's simply walking in. They can go in, completely contactless solution. They can leverage their mobile phone to engage with it if there are questions. Otherwise, it can be as simple as giving a green light means go, or they can actually check in for their appointment. So it's a pretty broad band of use cases, but at the foundation, we also, just a temperature check is really not necessarily enough. It's got to be secure, it's got to be private, and there's got to be other lanes of technology that can be utilized on that kiosk as well, whether it be check-in, whether it be a digital issue of a credit card, as Richard mentioned as well. But so far in the enterprise, healthcare and banking space, we've just been receiving overwhelming demand.
And it doesn't seem like, Ryan, it's invasive at all. And that's really what I was trying to drive down to.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Very simple. I think we can scan up to 500 people per hour.
Fabulous. Nancy, would you like to take that question?
Sure. I think what's interesting about what's happened recently is it hasn't really changed the trajectory of the financial services industry as much as really accelerated what everybody knew was going to be happening anyway. And one of the consequences of that is, once you've adopted some of these new and convenient behaviors, you're not going to resume your older, less convenient and more errand-driven behaviors of the past. And that's going to change what people think the branch is and is for. And for a long time, of course, the industry has been transitioning from transaction-centric locations to advice and guidance-centric locations. But I think this sort of quantum leap into the future adds some new color to what the branch will be, and probably one, we've said it in a lot of different ways in this call, but more unified with the online and mobile experience, and perhaps some ways that we haven't seen up till now. For instance, if you go into a bank branch today, you will see almost no indication of the online channels. There's no advice on how to use them. There's no best practices being proffered. The interface that you're going to see on a banker's desk doesn't look anything like the mobile interface, as we've said earlier here. So I think there's going to be just a reinvention, and I think the consumer is going to engage with the branch on a different sort of level in the future, just a different understanding of what it's there for. So, most people have never had in their lives a place to go for learning about how to perfect their money management through virtual means.
So true.
Now they might. They most certainly will be demanding it in the years to come. So I think it's going to be quite profound.
I agree with you, and it from the study and the research that Intel has been involved in, the bank and the bank branch is becoming more of a destination for the consumer. Yeah. So there's value add, and there's drawing activities or specific value adds that will actually pull the consumer into the bank or the bank branch. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah. So let me emphasize a couple of things that Nancy said. So I do think, I agree totally. We spend a lot of time in retail, hospitality, as well as banking. And COVID-19 just accelerating trends that have already been taking place, just to totally reiterate what you said, which is good. I also think that the post-COVID world is a world that's actually post-COVID. This is eventually going to go away. I think a lot of people, if you were to ask them their opinion, are we going to be still living with this virus with the kind of controls that we have to have in place today, a year from now? They would probably say that we're not. They'd probably say there's going to be a vaccine available, we'll be able to move on. And I think some of the base activities that we've come to enjoy as a society, like going out to eat or going to a concert or hanging out in a bar, those are going to come back. They're not going away. COVID-19 does not erase them permanently. But the digitization, the digital transformation, the good things that we've had to leverage to be able to survive COVID-19 are going to continue on. And one of the things that we see in banking is absolutely going to be, a more deeper, robust digital experience, more investment in digital, the ability to provide customers more services digitally. And then the branch itself is going to continue to morph. We think we're going to see a lot more pop-up branches, branches on usual locations, branches within other retailers, branches in other places, whether it's, a branch within a hospital or a branch, within, another retail or just a stadium or wherever else have you. And the ability to have microservices delivered out of a branch, which might not necessarily be there on a full-time basis and might not offer certain things like, cash, for example. It might purely be a digital, type of place. I think those are going to be important. And to what Nancy said, a lot of banking is going to become, about education, because, people go to banks to make very big decisions, like take out a mortgage, to open an investment account, make decisions about how they want to retire. So it's that, you know, complete set of experiences that go beyond just simply saying, I need to go buy a savings bond for my kid, you know, if people still do that, or I'm going to make a deposit or cash a check. It's really much more life cycle based. And because of it, you know, you're going to want the physical branch to be close to the user, make it easy for them to get there without having to, you know, do the kind of heavy lifting required to open up a full-time branch on the corner of every neighborhood. It just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I want to jump to the chat for just a second. Diane Campbell had posted a note in the chat and said, in-branch personalization might be challenging further now as banks are beginning to cut people. Richard, I think that's in regards to a comment you had about personalization.
Yeah.
Would you like to respond to that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So personalization is part of the digital process. And again, I think software is going to play a large role in that. A lot of it's about process automation. It's about being able to deploy new technologies like machine learning to allow personalization to take place without necessarily having a human drive every micro decision involved in it. You know, there's a lot of interesting things happening about, you know, concepts like digital twins, which I recommend, you know, if you're listening to this and are not familiar with it, look it up. But it's the notion that we're going to start to have a much richer sort of online, you know, digital world that's going to reflect some of the things that happen in the real world, with, you know, computers participating with this, you know, as part of the process.
Wonderful. Let me start with Nancy and our conclusion question. Looking into your crystal ball, what do you think the branch is going to resemble in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I think it's gonna, you know, a lot of banks would bring up the metaphor of the Apple Store for its Genius Bar. Virgin has created lounges in the UK that bear no resemblance to branches before. I mean, certainly some aspects of both of those things will be there, but I really think the notion of an immersive experience that is very focused on the gateway to the online experience in some form is what it's going to look like. And one just very interesting tidbit that I read recently about an experimental retail store that McKinsey put in the Mall of America, where I'm from in Minneapolis, was the discovery that the store personnel of the future is really an ambassador to help people use the various technologies that are in place for them to self-learn. High degree of interest in self-learn, like 95% of the shoppers didn't really need much more assistance than that. I think those sorts of things are going to be a very important part of how the branches operate going forward.
I agree, and I think the whole self-learn, teach me approach is going to be critical to how we move forward in our own journeys. Ryan, would you like to respond to the crystal ball question?
Following Nancy and Richard is really hard, guys. You know, I think when you bring up the point of banks, for example, having to let go of individuals, right? You know, given the new world. I think it's, you know, finding meaningful ways as well in the branch, and you get that customer in there to still give them a level of engagement that potentially you might not have available in that specific branch. I think leveraging telecommunication technologies, you know, call it, you know, the virtual banker, if that makes sense, in branches is extremely, extremely important. If someone's going to come into a small local branch, and to Richard's point, typically when you're going into a bank, you know, your average consumer has got probably a pretty big thing to discuss. That could be, you know, loan, financial, stocks, whatever the case may be. But I also notice sometimes you go into a branch, and it just happened to be a scenario, you know, recently for myself, we were going through a refinance, and you know, the individual who was working that particular day was, you know, a kid, you know, I don't want to say kid's the right word, but a younger man who doesn't have his own mortgage. So I'm sitting in front of someone, how are they going to give me advice not having gone through it themselves? And I said, you know, it'd be amazing if I could speak to the best person in the state face to face, but still be able to sign those documents. How do we accomplish that? So, you know, we've got that online experience, but I think leveraging telecommunications and being able to set up a virtual chat, if I go into that branch, if I'm that level of customer that needs the extra love, you know, maybe the person who has been managing large portfolios for 20, 30 years, I want to speak to that person in the branch. I want it to be on the face, and I want to be able to sign that document in person as well. So I think leveraging that kind of technology and solutions is super, super important.
Agree. Richard, would you like to round out?
Sure. Yeah, I'll agree. I think there's going to be more variety in the types of branches we see. As I mentioned earlier, many of them are going to be smaller, less traditional. They're going to have a lighter footprint. They might be pop-ups, you know, around events. It's because a lot of it, as Nancy said, is about education and outreach. You know, as Ryan said, it's about also having the right person there to give the person the right level of support. And there's, again, no reason why you can't have a branch of one, you know, a single bank employee in a remote location that's effectively the branch wherever they go, if they have the right tools and technology available to them. You know, that said, I'll also use my own, you know, personal experiences. You know, my branch, you know, where I live was closing, and with it, I lost my safety deposit box. You know, I looked around to try to find a branch with a safety deposit box nearby, and that service just seems to be disappearing. I mean, you know, so there are certain, you know, traditional bank services that I think people rely on, which they're always going to rely on. And I think it's going to be, you know, it's going to be important to find a way to be able to carry some of those older, you know, sort of very traditional things forward as well, because it all can't be digital all at once. Digital safety, I can't encrypt my physical objects, right? So,
That's true.
Richard, just put it all in Bitcoin. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Sell my mother's wedding ring and put it in Bitcoin.
Okay, let me check our chat box and see what kind of questions we have coming in. We don't have any questions coming in. I'm kind of shocked. I know, Dale, you have to have a question. Nothing yet. You're right, but you guys have nailed it. Well, thank you, Dale. I appreciate that. So any last parting comments or words from the panelists? Ryan?
I would just say certainly appreciate the invitation, and obviously being able to share the panel with Richard and Nancy from John Ryan and Richard from Reliant was an absolute pleasure. Appreciate the collaboration. Anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot them out, and we're more than happy to connect.
Wonderful, thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, same thing. Thank you. And it's great to kind of open up these conversations. I'm really looking forward to what the world is going to present to all of us in the months to come. It's a great topic. So thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Richard.
Yeah, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists and thank Intel for making this possible and the NPC show overall. This is a wonderful event. I encourage everyone, connect with me either on LinkedIn or contact me directly via email. I'm happy to answer any questions. You know, what I think is what makes me excited, what gets me out of bed in the morning is the amount of innovation that we're seeing right now. I mean, this is a tough year. I don't think a lot of people are going to go, 2020, God, that was so much fun. But I will tell you that, you know, in our collective trauma, there's also the silver lining is how quickly this is causing innovation to occur, how many new things we're going to start seeing happen over the next few years that are going to be building on this. So
that's right, and that would be my parting comment. I think with 2020, it's been quite a disruptor of what we've lived through so far this year, but I see with all the disruptions, there's a wonderful silver lining and opportunity that will be the catalyst for a lot of the innovation that we're starting to see. And much of the innovation that we're hearing about at the MPC Digital Commerce Show. So Marla and team, thank you very much for allowing us to be one of your sponsors. Intel so appreciates that. To my elite panelists, thank you very much for all your help and support and thought leadership today. It's very appreciated.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you all.